In this episode of Locked On Capitals, I talk with Andrew Gillis of NBC Sports Washington as we talk about the series so far. Who do we think is going to win game number 4? We talk about the big play of Anthony Mantha, most notably known as a goal scorer. He's really brought his physical game. And then we'll talk about the netminding situation. It seems like a no-brainer to go back to Ilya Samsonov, but is that who the Capitals will really go with? And then we talk about the status of Tom Wilson. Can we expect to see him in this postseason? We'll talk about all of that and more next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over and check that out. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So like I said, in this episode, I talk with Andrew Gillis, and we talk about the playoff series so far and what is the future of this Washington Capitals team. We'll talk about that next. All right, we are now joined by Andrew Gillis of NBC Sports Washington. Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Dan. I really appreciate it.
You bet. So this series so far is kind of gone back and forth, and the Capitals now have the lead 2-1 in the series, and there's some good stats on the Washington Capitals side. The Game 3 winner wins it 68% of the time. What are your thoughts on the series so far?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has gone a little bit different from the way you might have thought. I mean, through the first 3 games, I think there's a really compelling argument that the Capitals have been the better team for, 66% of the series, maybe give or take. I mean, I thought they were really, really good in game 1. And even game 2, I thought they were really good in the first period, through the first part of the second period, and then it kind of went off a cliff. But game 3, I thought they played a pretty decent game. I actually thought their best game was game 1. But, game 3 is the game that you kind of have to win. Those are the games you need a goalie to play well. You need to get some breaks to go your way. They did. And I thought that they looked really good. So, carrying a 2-1 lead into game 4, you only got to win 2 of the next potential 4 games. You're sitting pretty. I think that it's been a great start. And I think, truthfully, you couldn't ask for more for them.
Yeah, I'm most impressed with it, and I was really impressed with the play of Ilya Samsonov. I know that there's been a lot of talk about inconsistency in net this past season. We'll talk about that later in the show, but just talking about the last game, how the Ilya Samsonov played lights out hockey, and you talked about it as much about net minding. Ilya Samsonov stopped 29 of 30 shots faced in Game 3, earning his first career playoff win. Ilya Samsonov has faced almost as many shots in that other game too. So, I mean, you were talking about that. I saw your post on NBC Sports Washington. Talk to me a little bit about the play of Ilya Samsonov. I know it's kind of a coin flip most every game on who's going to start, if it's Vitek Vanacek or Ilya Samsonov. What are your thoughts on Ilya Samsonov's play in the last game in particular?
Yeah, I mean, Peter Laviolette kind of mentioned this when somebody had asked about, or somebody asked him, excuse me, about, playing 2 goalies. And he's like, you almost look at it kind of like a negative, but it's really not. He's like, we were a 100-point team with 2 goalies. And like, you kind of see where he's coming from, because you look at the entire season, and the Capitals, they played Samsonov, they played Vanacek, they played both of them, pretty much exactly the same. And you're doing that without Anthony Mantha for a lot of the year, without TJ Oshie, without Nicholas Backstrom kind of working his way back in. You did that without a lot of those guys. So, I mean, I think there's a reasonable case to be made that they could have been a better team if they were fully healthy with kind of this two goalie tandem. So, maybe perhaps we underrated it. I don't know if we did. But I think yesterday in game 3, Samsonov was unbelievable. And I think that is kind of the performance that he can give you, right? He lets in that first shot go by Huberdeau, and true, that's just an ugly goal. That is not a goal you can allow in the playoffs. But the thing that Samsonov does really well is make those kind of saves where you go, oh wow, they needed that one. It was the Johansson goal yesterday where he makes a big left pad save, kick out save, and Caps go the other way, and they score. And now they lead 2-1. They're not down 2-1. Then all of a sudden you can get one late in the period after a couple other big saves. Like that is exactly the performance that you needed. I was so impressed by him. Just kind of the way he controlled himself. I forget who it was, and I'm kind of kicking myself here, but somebody came in on his crease, and Samsonov just kind of stared him down and gave him a little shove with the blocker. Like, if you remember when Braden Holtby would make a save, he would kind of flash the leather a little sassy, and that was kind of how you knew he was on his game. I thought that was kind of the way I knew Samsonov was on his game. He just looked confident, truthfully, maybe even more confident than I'd seen him all year. So, yeah, excellent day for him.
And they have to go back to Samsonov on tomorrow night, right? I mean, they can't go back to Vitek Vanacek. Yeah, I mean, I was watching the ESPN feed, and they were kind of mystified as to why Vanacek wasn't getting the start. And I just think that there's certain intangibles. I think that he's a better athlete. I think overall, I think that Vitek Vanacek might have a little bit better shots at tracking the puck at points. But I think, like I say, it's a no-brainer to go back to Ilya Samsonov. So one of the things I'm going to talk about in this last game number 3, was something that was missing the entire series, was at the physical presence of the game. It just seemed like the Florida Panthers were kind of thrown around the Washington Capitals like a rag doll, and there was no response. It left me frustrated almost the previous 2 games. I know that the Capitals won game 1. But Gudis in particular, he had that high stick on Tom Wilson, and then he threw Hathaway to the ice. And there was I know that there was a penalty on the Hathaway one, but they have to stand up to this Florida Panthers team. And, it's good that they're getting it from Anthony Mantha, but I would say that the physical game was the most noticeable aspect of the last game. What did you think about the physical game?
Yeah, I mean, the physical game is kind of ramped up, and I think the Capitals I think this is really the department where you miss a Tom Wilson type because not only can he, lay the body defense, I think we saw yesterday, like you mentioned, Anthony Mantha. I thought Mantha has been really, really good this series. And Mantha had that great forecheck. And when you just have that physical presence, that can kind of lead you into, offensive scoring opportunities. It can get you out of a defensive jam. So, but truthfully, with the physicality part of this thing, like, the Panthers, that is not their game. Like, listen, the Panthers can get physical. They can be physical. They've got some of those guys that you just mentioned. They've got Mason Marchment, they've got Patrick Hornquist. They've got guys that can lay the body. They've got guys that can play that style of game. But the reason they won the President's Trophy was not because they beat everybody up on the way to do it. The reason they won the President's Trophy is because they score more goals than anybody else in the world, and anybody else has since 96. So to me, that is the game that you almost want the Panthers to play. Like, if you can bring them down to that level, that's a win, because this, we all know in the playoffs, the rule book kind of gets thrown away. Kuznetsov kind of made a joke about that down in Florida. Like, you kind of just, he's like, I think it was something like, you don't really play hockey until the third period. Like, you kind of throw the rule book away. And if you can get that to work for you in this series, I really like the Caps' chances. So I think that, the physicality aspect is certainly something where you're going to miss Tom Wilson, but, it's worked for him so far.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I noticed. And being that you were talking about a physical game, I think that the Washington Capitals, that has kind of been their identity, to be a physical team. But, maybe there's some things that we're not looking at. Maybe it's Peter Laviolette perhaps doesn't want it, because you realize if you play a physical game, that also means you're going to spend some time in the box as well, because inevitably those are going to be some penalties in there. So there was a beat writer for the Panthers, Aaron Brown, was talking about the Florida Panthers say they can play a physical game. The numbers say otherwise. Over the past 2 seasons, including playoffs, when the Panther records more than 40 hits in a game, they're 2-7. So that kind of speaks to your point there, is that, physicality isn't everything. But, as a fan, you watch the game and you see him getting thrown around. You're just like, come on, stand up for yourself, guys. It kind of reminds me of that Flyers game years ago where Braden Holtby was getting the crap beat out of him by Emery, and no one really did anything about it. So, that was just the frustrating part. It was good to see that physical aspect return. And one of the things you were talking about was Anthony Mantha. Anthony Mantha is not really, intrinsically a tough guy out there, but he's kind of had to step into that role. Because of Tom Wilson's absence, Anthony Mantha recorded 2 assists in Game 3. Anthony Mantha led the Capitals with 10 hits in Game 1. Mantha's 10 hits are tied for the 5th highest recorded total in playoff game in franchise history. So we were talking about Anthony Mantha a little bit there, but, this is a guy that's really stepped up. We missed him for a good chunk of the season with shoulder surgery, but he's getting great goals, and he's upping his physical game in the absence of Tom Wilson. What are your thoughts on Anthony Mantha's play as of late?
He's been unbelievable. I mean, he's exactly, you kind of mentioned replacing that Tom Wilson's type and that Tom Wilson style. I mean, with Mantha, I think he kind of joked after game one, like, yeah, I don't know if I'll have 10 hits every game. But, to me, he's been all over the ice. He's been really noticeable. And I think that there are a few guys that you can kind of say that, maybe they're not leading the team in goals, leading the team in assists, but they've been noticeable. And Mantha's been one of them. He had that great forecheck yesterday. To me, he's just a guy that he's almost your perfect second line wing complement to go behind Alex Ovechkin. And when you're able to do that, now I know he was playing with Lars Eller a lot, but when you're able to put him there, he's just such a physical presence. He can score, he can skate. Like, he's pretty much exactly what this team is. When they traded for him last year, that was kind of the whole knock, like, why did they give up all these picks? Why did they give up Jacob Vrana for this? Why did they do? Well, I mean, I think this series is kind of proving why. The cost is very steep, don't get me wrong, but Anthony Mantha, he's just fit right in. And I think that really this series, I mean, last year, even against Boston, I thought he was pretty good, even though he didn't score. To me, it's just a continuation of a guy that's playing really well in the playoffs. He's a kind of guy that the playoff style kind of fits him. He's 6'5". He can kind of hang around. So yeah, he's been perfect for the Capitals. Truthfully, he's been exactly what they needed.
All right. So just to wrap up this segment here, Andrew, I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball, and I want you to make a prediction on this series. Who wins? How many games does it go to? Just give me your thoughts on how this series will play out, in your opinion.
Well, I must add, before I answer this, at the beginning of the series, I did pick Florida in 6. My original prediction was I thought the Caps were going to win in game 1, which they did. And then whoever they were going to play, I've said this for a couple of weeks, whoever they were going to play was going to kind of turn on the Jets, and the Caps just weren't going to have enough goaltending. They weren't going to have enough speed to kind of keep up. I'm going to change that answer now. Truthfully, I'm going to go Caps in 7 at this point. 6 might be pushing it, I think, because I think Florida is going to come out really hard in 4. But I think the Capitals just have proven that they can handle this style of play. And I think that they've proven that they can get good enough, if not really, really good goaltending. I thought Vitek was good and was pretty good in game 1. I thought Samsonov of the 3 games, he gave their best goalie performance in game 3. So, I think they're going to win the series at this point. And that is certainly something that I would have gotten wrong before the series. So, I think I'll stick with Caps in 7.
Yeah, it's one of those tough things. I mean, the Florida Panthers won the President's Trophy on paper. It seems like a slam dunk, but it'll be an interesting series for sure. All right, so after the break here, we're going to talk about the net minding situation. Yes, it's something that we've talked about the entire season, and then we're going to talk about the status of Tom Wilson after the break. BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all of the latest sports development, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball, and this weekend's Run to the Roses as the Kentucky Derby is back. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Bet Online, where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen. For your next listen, check out Locked On Now podcasts, nightly recaps of every NHL game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, welcome back. We have Andrew Gillis with us from NBC Sports Washington, and let's talk about the play, the net-minding play. We talked about how Ilya Samsonov played. Like I said, he stopped 29 of 30 shots faced in Game 3, and then he came in relief for Vitek Vanacek. There's been so much talk about the net-minding situation this year. It's gone back and forth from Vanacek to Samsonov. And did the Capitals do the right thing at the trade deadline by doing nothing? I know that, just looking back over the situation and historically, it was Braden Holtby when he left and went to Vancouver. Then they had Henrik Lundqvist come over, and then he had that heart condition. And then they were kind of just left with Samsonov and Vitek Vanacek. Vitek Vanacek, which most people talked about would maybe be a starter in AHL Hershey at best. They went with the youngest tandem in the league. And what are your thoughts on the net-minding situation? What are they going to do after the season? Are they going to have to pick up that veteran netminder? I guess a lot hinges on how they play, but it just seems like they can't afford to pay both of those, so they're going to have to pick one of them and go with it. What are your thoughts overall on the goaltending situation all season, not just this playoff series?
Yeah, man, this is a really tough question. I think it's a tough question for you and I to answer. I think it's a tough question for Brian McClellan to answer. I think when you look back at the deadline, I think kind of, like you said, going back, I think they, a lot of people could have said, oh, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they get this guy? Well, what were you going to get at the deadline that was better than what you got in games 1 and 3? Like, what were you going to get that was so good or so consistent? Now, if all reports were that Marc-Andre Fleury wasn't really willing to come here. So to me, that kind of took everything out of the equation. So I think they are looking for a veteran. I think they will this offseason. But like you said, you've got Vanacek, you've got Samsonov. Both of them are RFAs. And I think that this playoffs is going to be really important for both of their contract statuses, for both of next year and who they want to keep. Because the book on Vanacek and the book on Samsonov is in my opinion, pretty written right now. Now, doesn't mean it's going to stay that way, but right now it's Samsonov is the guy that has all the athleticism, has all of this physical skills. He just can't put together the, night in, night out. He'll make 29 to 30. And then, there are a couple of times during the regular season where the next night he gets pulled. Vanacek, you just need him to make a few more of those. We needed one there. We needed a big save, but he'll make all the saves he should make. So I think it's going to depend. I think that if you can bring in a goalie that is, high upside, that is a Marc-Andre Fleury type, maybe a guy that's won a cup, maybe a guy that's contended for a cup, maybe a guy that is, one of the better goalies in the league, whoever that may be, just kind of insert your name here. I think maybe it makes sense to go with Vanacek in that situation, get some more stability behind that. Or if you're going to bring in a guy who's a veteran who you kind of have the 1A, 1B situation again, but maybe a little bit more stable. Maybe you go Samsonov. I mean, it's a really tough question to answer right now. And I think the playoff series is going to matter a lot because, what do you do if Ilya Samsonov, because right now, going into the playoffs, I would have said, yeah, Samsonov, I think this might have been it. But what do you do if Samsonov carries you to the third or the fourth round of the playoffs? And forget wins anything significant, wins the cup, wins whatever. Like, what do you do in that situation if you get a guy like that can carry you deep? Do you bring back both of them? Do you bring back him? I don't know. And so I think they're going to bring in a veteran goalie this offseason. I think they've kind of talked a few times. They like the depth that they've got. They like some of the younger goalies. They just signed one this what was that, March or a couple of weeks ago. So I think that they like the depth in the organization. But right now, I think they're looking for a vet, and I think the playoffs are truthfully going to determine who stays and who goes.
Yeah, because if you look at this team historically, I mean, last year they had Craig Anderson, who moved on to Buffalo, and he kind of played pretty well, I got to say, for Buffalo. And part of this season, I was thinking to myself, they could have used someone like him this season, just that steady hand in net. And if you look back historically, they had Justin Peters and Thomas Vokoun. They've always kind of just, other than the Braden Holtby Grubauer time, they've always kind of had that veteran netminder for like the past, 10 years or so. So I think it is a good idea for them to end up going with a veteran netminder. It just seems like, for whatever reason, this Washington Capitals team, and, it's the intangibles. And, when I was talking with JJ Regan, he was saying that, the coaches see stuff that we don't see. It just seems that this Capitals team is all in on Ilya Samsonov, because the thing of it is that everyone's drinking the Kool-Aid on him right now because he played this really great game. But he could play a poor game the next game, and everyone would be, for his head, get rid of him. Because if you think about Vanacek, he played awesome, and he had that last game. And if you go on social media, everyone's like, "What are we doing with this piece of crap? Why didn't we trade him?" So I got to say that the DC fans are a bit fickle when it comes to net minding. But one interesting thing that was said was that the Washington Capitals, with those two goalies for the lion's share of the season, got to 100 points. So, I mean, you don't get to 100 points by being having poor goalies. I mean, I know that they've had inconsistency, but they've been able to string together wins with both of them kind of piecemeal here and there. It's not ideal, and it's not the ideal situation going into the playoffs when, Peter Laviolette said, when I go to the playoffs, I want to know who my number one netminder is. And I kind of felt when it was game one, he really didn't know who he was going with. I think I read that Vitek Vanacek found out that he was going to be the starter on the plane ride to there, or something to that effect. So I just really hope that they can tie up those loose ends with the net minding there. So
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I mean, to your point, like I was going to say, I think that first off, in the playoffs with social media, it's always they win a game and it's, oh my God, they're Samsonov's going to win the Conn Smythe and whatever. But I think that they're really kind of comfortable with this two goalie system right now. But that's not to say, if Ilya Samsonov goes out, plays great in game 4, plays great in game 5, and they win and they beat the Panthers in 5 games, let's just say, like, there's not a goalie controversy for going into round 2. Like, there's just not. Now, maybe there is after games 1 and 2, but like Peter Laviolette is going to play the hot hand. And if it just so happens that hot hand is one guy for as long as you can ride the wave, he's going to ride that wave. So I think that, like you said, he would love to go to one guy, but if he's very comfortable, it seems, going to 2. So.
Yeah, and it seems like the Capitals have had always really great depth. I mean, they have Hunter Shepard and Zach Fucale and Phoenix Copley, who, let's be honest with you, he's had his shot in the NHL, and if it doesn't work out with the Washington Capitals, maybe he can move on and get a spot somewhere else, because you kind of feel bad for these guys that kind of toil forever in the AHL. So, but I mean, it is a tough situation in net. All right, after the break here, we are going to talk about a possible rebuild for this Capitals team if it's an early exit, and then we'll talk about Tom Wilson's status after the break. Summer is coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on your family vacations. Throw them in your bags and your kids' backpacks. Make sure that everyone has a bar so you are fueled for summer adventures. The best part about Built Bars, they're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food for health. With Built Bar, you can have both, and it's easy. All you have to do is go to Built.com and order now. All Built Bars and Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means that with Built Bar, you can eat healthy and actually enjoy doing it. Have you tried the Puffs yet? We are going crazy for the Puffs. They come in crazy flavors like banana, cream pie, and even churro. Who doesn't want a protein bar that tastes like churro and they're only 140 calories? Sign me up. If that's not enough flavor for you, you might want to try the Mixed Box. The Mixed Box comes with 12 flavors and bars and puffs. Built Bars make sure that there is something for everyone. Know what my favorite flavor is? It's the churro, of course. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So go to Built.com to get all your favorites, a banana cream pie, raspberry double chocolate, and so many more. They are all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. Check them out at Built.com. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. That's right, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, welcome back. We are joined here with Andrew Gillis of NBC Sports Washington. And one of the things that's been talked about is a possible rebuild. So, say the Capitals fall flat on their face and they make an early exit. Do you think a rebuild is looming? I mean, I think a lot of the onus for the goaltending situation lies with McClellan. He did nothing. And I think, to a certain extent, his job might be in jeopardy. We often hear about this window that's open, but it's closing. We're talking about the Alex Ovechkin and Nick Backstrom era. And he really didn't do nothing to help that out by not picking up a veteran netminder. You think that when they're talking about this window being open and that we're in a win now mode, are you really in a win now mode when you have an unproven net-minding commodity in the form of Vitek Vanacek and Ilya Samsonov?
Yeah, I think you can. I think kind of like I mentioned earlier, I'm not gonna fault McClellan for the trade deadline too much because we can talk about some of the names. I mean, is Jonathan Bernier, is he show up and be the guy? You know what I'm saying? It does, if you want to make the argument for Fleury, but sounded like Fleury wasn't going to come here. Now, if Fleury was available and they did, okay, I think that's a reasonable counter argument. But like I said, all reports were that Fleury wasn't going to come here. So I just the goalie situation, I don't think there was a like smack you in the face answer. But it's going to be an interesting question. I think they're going to try and contend as long as they can. But I don't know if it'll be a full scale tear down rebuild because, if you lose to a Florida team in the first round of the playoffs, it's kind of a difficult thing to judge there. You lose to the President's Trophy winners, a team that scored more goals since anybody since 96. It's hard to kind of say, oh, we're not any good, or how do we there are variations there. Now, I do think they're going to have to do some kind of a rebuild on the fly. I think that, if you look at kind of their contract situation moving forward, they've got a couple good pieces, but you look at their defense, and I think defense is sneaky where they're going to add this year because they've got a lot of forwards under contract next year. They've got guys like Protas and Hershey. Leeson, for the most part, has been in Hershey. Like, you've got guys that you can kind of call up and play depth roles, but defense, I think, forgive me, this is off the top of my head, but I believe John Carlson, after the 2022-23 season, is the only one that's left under contract. So I think they're going to have to work to shore that up. I think you're going to have to get younger in a lot of spots. That counts forward too. So, maybe a guy like Lars Eller moves so you can kind of save some money, bring in a spot rather for a Connor McMichael to kind of take over a third line center role full time. But Lars Eller's played well over the last couple of weeks. So I don't think a full scale rebuild is really on the table at all. I think a kind of retool on the fly is going to be necessary, truthfully, because I think you're going to have to add a veteran goalie. Like I said, I think you're going to have the money to bring in some kind of notable defenseman, probably on the right side. Then you're going to, maybe you can add a forward, bring in another forward. So there's moves they can make. I just don't see that. I just don't see it yet to where there's going to be a full tear down, we need draft picks rebuild.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that from my understanding is that when Alex Ovechkin re-upped, there was a certain understanding that he would be able to be playing on a team that's competing. He didn't want to go through this kind of thing that the Washington Nationals are going through, where Juan Soto is the franchise player, kind of wandering in the wilderness with a lot of unknowns. That you don't want to deal with that in Washington. But the defense is a tough situation because if I ever bring up net minding on social media, which, let's be honest, we shouldn't go on there anyway because there's so much negativity, is I'll bring up net minding and everyone goes, well, it's not net minding, it's the defense. And to that, I've said in a previous podcast, who are you taking out of that lineup? John Carlson? You're going to take him out? Dmitry Orlov? Van Riemsdyk, Jensen, are any of those guys not playing on top of their game? I mean, when I watch the game, I know that, you can't put everything on the goalie's shoulder, but take a look at the defense. Who's coming out of that lineup to be any better? I mean, you look at John Carlson, arguably one of the best defensemen in Capitals history, I got to say. Dmitry Orlov is a good two-way player. He's tough and he has good offensive potential. So if the Washington Capitals had to make a move in defense, who goes? Who comes out of that lineup? I guess you could say Van Riemsdyk. He's kind of a younger player, but it's really a tough spot for the Capitals. You got Schultz in there too, which I guess if I had to pick one expendable one, it would probably be Schultz. What are your thoughts on the defense? If they had to part with one player right now, who would it be? It's a tough spot.
Yeah, and I actually kind of really like their defense as it is right now. You kind of mentioned it. You've got John Carlson and Martin Ferivari. I mean, that's a pairing that you have to really like. And then Dmitry Orlov and Nick Jensen. I mean, that's also unbelievable. I think that's a great pairing. And I think that more specifically with those two, they kind of really match each other's skill sets well. So this year, I don't think I don't think Michael Kempney or Matt Irwin is kind of beating down the door on one of those guys. Those six have played really well together. Next year, that's a different question because I think that, if I'm not mistaken, Justin Schultz is going to be a free agent. He makes $4 million right now. So maybe that's a place you go if you want to save some money. If you want to, because, Trevor Van Riemsdyk is a righty. So he's played the left side this year. Maybe you bump him over. You got Alex Alexiev coming up. Alex Alexiev seems, kind of like he's ready to make that NHL jump, or at least seems like he can see what he can do at the NHL level. So, there's a couple different options there, but I think next year is going to be the year where maybe some defensive changes. But even still, I mean, you've got a lot of those guys under contract. So, or at least for another year. So I don't think there's going to be any wholesale changes on the defense. But I think Justin Schultz would be that one guy where you could say if somebody's not here next year, that would be him.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to pick an expendable defenseman, but if I just knee-jerk reaction, that's who I guess I would pick. I couldn't really picture the Capitals without John Carlson or Dmitry Orlov, something like that. All right, so Tom Wilson, that is the big topic of the postseason. I know that there's that high hit from Gudis. That isn't what caused the injury, but, Tom Wilson's presence is noticeable when he's not out on the ice. I know that he's kind of seen around the league as kind of a goon, a tough guy. But that kind of flies in the face of the fact that he scored 20 plus goals. If you look at the true goons in the league, I hate to name names, but Ryan Reeves, he's a tough guy out there, but he doesn't have a real goal scoring potential. Now, I hate to read the tea leaves here, and I know that the Hershey Bears are in the playoffs, but it says the Capitals have reassigned forward Brett Leeson to the Hershey Bears. Tom Wilson, lower body, is not participating in Capitals optional skate. So what do you know as being an insider to the team? What do you know about Tom Wilson? I want to know more about the situation. It doesn't seem like there's a lot to know. It seems like the Capitals are keeping the knowledge of Tom Wilson close to the vest. Is there a chance we see him in the playoffs? Peter Laviolette doesn't like to divulge a lot, and I guess maybe he's told not to. But if it is a knee injury, which is speculated on, that's probably he's not going to be able to return. What do you know?
Yeah, I know pretty much as you do. Laviolette kind of mentioned today that, it's day by day. And I think, yeah, forgive me, I'm butchering his exact quote, but he said something like it's day to day. So I'm only going to answer for today. And today he's not here. So I'll answer tomorrow's day to day tomorrow. And it was kind of a little tongue in cheek, a little like, we'll answer that later. But like, teams do not really like to divulge anything really in the playoffs. I mean, I think it was a couple of years ago, Barry Trotz, I think he joked that somebody had a body injury.
Yeah.
So, you can kind of look into a couple different things that teams don't really like to say what's going on. So I don't think we're going to know what's going on with Tom Wilson until either two things. Until one, he's either ready to come back to play, or, he's whether or not we see him on the ice at practice, whether they say he's going to play next game, whatever that may be, or it's Tom Wilson is out for the postseason. It would have to be something like that. I think that the longer this strings on, maybe they think that there's a chance he's going to play the series in early round two, whatever it is. You kind of mentioned sending Leeson down. I would bet that they would call up a forward for game 5. But the way that I read that was they got through game 3 healthy, and they like the way that Connor McMichael played because you have Axel Janssen-Fialbi as your 13th forward. You're at home. Everybody's healthy. You've got a 13th forward already. You're fine. Now, when you go down to Florida, it might be one of those situations where you just kind of want to have an extra body on hand in case a nightmare scenario happens where somebody gets food poisoning and somebody slips in warmups. I mean, you've got to be ready for all of those scenarios. So maybe they call up a forward there. But the Leeson thing to me, like I said, that kind of read to me as they either like the way Connor McMichael played. Maybe it's Tom Wilson related. Who knows? But right now, there's just not a lot to know with Tom Wilson, and we're just going to have to wait and see. And, I guess, obviously you want to see everybody at full strength. So, best wishes to him. But right now it's kind of an unknown.
Yeah, because it's kind of a different situation with the Ovechkin thing. You could kind of tell that he was going to come back. He had
Right.
that presser and he said, maybe I'll be back, and you kind of knew that he was going to come back. But, to your point, if Tom Wilson was in fact out for the series, say it was, some sort of a substantial knee injury, I mean, wouldn't they just say that he is in fact out? It doesn't seem like there's any advantage to, trying to be vague about it because, I mean, like I say, if he is in fact, his knee is screwed up and he can't play the rest of the season, why not just say that Tom Wilson is out for the season unless they're trying to foil the Panthers' plans for the future? I know that, Peter Laviolette likes to do that. He doesn't like to say anything about anything really most of the time, most like who's going to start a net, that kind of thing. So, man, I just hope that it's not a major injury for Tom Wilson because, we talk about a physical presence. If when Tom Wilson's lit up out there and smashing people into the boards, look out, the Washington Capitals could really use that right now. All right,
Yeah, with Wilson, it's just, he's so, like we kind of mentioned earlier with Mantha, he just creates so much. He's one of your best penalty killers too. He plays that second bumper spot on the power play. So now you need another guy to replace, when Oshie goes down or when Oshie goes off the ice, excuse me. So you have the second, you just lose so much with him on the ice in the dressing room. So it's really, I mean, if he can't go, this is a pretty significant loss for Washington for as long as he's out.
Yeah, we're just hoping for, a speedy recovery is about all we can hope for. All right, Andrew, thank you for joining us today. Why don't you tell everyone where we can find your work?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter. I believe it's below on me, Andrew
Mhm.
underscore Gillis 70. I'm the Capitals and Wizards guy for NBC Sports Washington. But obviously, right now, I am solely Caps as we kind of move into the playoffs. So all of my articles will be there and looking forward to it. I'll be down in Florida for game 5. So I'll be on site and hopefully we'll get some good stuff out of it.
All right, thank you so much for joining me, Andrew Gillis of NBC Sports Washington.